I guess what I'm throwing out there as part of having an open, honest conversation is, are the choices you're making based on what you value and believe? Or how much of that, I wonder, is based on the expectation and the messaging that we receive from the outside world that tells us that this is what being beautiful with the right body image looks like.
Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLachlan.
I'm Erica Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms.
Hey, Erica.
Hello, Anita.
How you doing?
I am doing pretty good. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm well. We've got another juicy topic on Midlife Unfiltered that we're about to unpack on body image. How do you feel about that?
It's a big one. I think talking about body image is always tricky because it is one of those things that perhaps our individual experience of it feels quite personal and maybe quite isolated, even though it is also part of a kind of collective experience of being a human in the world. But we're going to do our best.
We are. And with a midlife slant. So I guess for those who don't know a bit about my world, body image for me came up big time because being a swimwear retailer and swimsuit fitter, the Cosy Whisperer for so many years, 15 years, this came up a lot. And I started the Cosy Confidence movement as a result of this, was having conversations with women who would come to me, wanting a swimsuit and in many instances reluctantly, regretfully going, I've got to have this because I'm either going away or I'm in the pool for therapy or fitness but it's the last thing. And it was a real test for these women was putting on a swimsuit. And I still believe it's one of the great tests of how you feel about yourself and your body for the world to see, or seemingly for the world to see. And it seems to always promote conversations of judgment, which saddens me to the core. And those judgment calls are within ourselves, but also against others, and it gets really nasty. I mean, you only have to go onto some posts on social media and see the backlash of someone who might be a bigger size, doing something or looking fantastic, but someone goes, oh no, you're promoting unhealthiness and all the rest of it. It just really makes me sad and quite angry. So when we talk about body image for Midlife Unfiltered, it is that, but it also we're going to weave in a little bit of the other stuff that tends to come up in this time of life that might be a little bit different to previous conversations about body image, which is really about how we perceive and feel about how we look. And again, when we talk about expectations and filters we want to bust, the whole notion that we put so much value on how we look, that's something I want to touch on in this episode as well. So, lots to cover. It is big. But we'll do our darndest just to hit some high notes. And I'll put it out there right now, if you have struggled with your body image, if you don't want to hear this conversation too much now, come back to it later when you feel that you may be able to listen to it. I'm really sorry if you feel that way. But if not, let's explore together right now what it means to be body conscious, body image in midlife. Okay, let's do it. When I was putting some thoughts together for this conversation, Erica, the first thing that came to my mind was, when you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror first thing, what do you see? And what do you say to yourself? Is that a conversation that you have with yourself most days at all?
I thought about this because I was like, do I have a conversation with myself? I tend to have a lot of conversations with myself. That's something I definitely do. I talk to myself a lot in my head. And I was trying to think, what's the narrative when it comes to like looking at myself in the mirror in the morning? And I think the thing that stands out for me is I'm this is going to sound a little odd maybe, but I'm quite fascinated, I think, when I look in the mirror because I'm like, I don't always recognize the woman looking back at me. And so there is sometimes this moment of just like, huh, who's she? And not in an awful way, but it to me, I'm really trying, and I think it's a conscious effort, but I'm really trying to choose fascination and wonder over criticism.
Mm.
But if I'm also, I guess being completely honest, probably the thing that like trips me up is that every morning when I look in the mirror, I do think, far out, she looks tired. Um, I'm really mindful of the fact that I look tired and I don't look the same as I used to. I have a really prominent frown line in my forehead, which sometimes I am frustrated by. So it's a kind of a bit of a both and for me. There's that sense of there's some things that I see that, I wonder like would I change it if I could? And then there is also that part of me that is genuinely fascinated by who that woman might be. And I mean that in a like, I'm not disconnected from myself, I don't think. But more in terms of this sort of ongoing fascination with who might I be becoming as I kind of continue to move through midlife. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Because we are evolving, we are changing. And it could be the simple thing of, where's the next wrinkle popped up? Is it
Yes.
is it around, oh, I'm looking for wrinkles. I'm on the hunt. When I look in the mirror, what's new? What's popped up today that I didn't see yesterday or last week
Mm,
or the month before? I feel that sometimes. It's like, let's do a quick scan. What's different? And
mm,
yeah, and I think consciously, like you, with the fascination piece, it's consciously going, well, okay, this is who you are. It's not the judgment, not introducing that judgment as much as possible. Um, but there are, and for me, I haven't gone grey much yet, but I know that is a big physical change that we see in midlife. It's probably, number two, number one for many women. The wrinkles, is the other thing, the skin, and how that's changing. I know the sunspots are coming up and I can see all that coming through. And goodness knows when you go and get your skin checks done, there's probably hack lines showing up now where you've had things cut out. And then the other thing for me is, and for I know a lot of other women too, is this belly that just seems to have, got its own mind over the last couple of years. Things have changed there when I've noticed that part of my body has changed the most. And I know for most women in midlife, that is a zone that has changed a lot physically for them. So yeah, there's lots of places and features of my body that I know have changed. And I've noticed the change more dramatically, probably in midlife than any other time of my life.
mm,
And that's just
mm.
my personal experience. Mm.
Yeah, I that makes sense. You mentioned the grey hair thing, and I am letting myself go grey. It's very hard to see on camera, so if anybody's watching the video version of
Yeah,
this, I'll
you
be like,
don't
"No,
look
you're
grey,
not.
girl. No, no,
I'm
no.
really grey." So
Right.
it's really interesting. I saw a photo of myself the other day, or actually I think I'd taken a video for Instagram or something, and the way the light was hitting and, just the parts of where my hair was parted, I am, like, so grey, and I went to my husband and I was like, "I'm really grey," and he's like, "Yeah, you are."
Yeah. Yeah, you are.
And I was like, "Huh." I'm consciously choosing that. I made the decision to stop dyeing my hair a couple of years ago, so it's been happening for a while, and it's another place where I'm actually quite fascinated. It's quite interesting to watch my hair change because it's changing texture. Some of it's curly and it's like I've got dead straight hair, and so I sometimes have these little curly grey hairs sticking out the top of my head. And I think that example for me raises a lot of really interesting things around midlife, around the comparison that we can do. And I don't see a lot of women doing the same thing at my age. You know, I'm 41. I started going grey before my mother-in-law did, in terms of allowing myself, you know, like stopping dyeing my hair. I had stopped before my mother-in-law. So, you know, she's 20 something years older than me. And so I do sometimes have that question, because sometimes when I talk about going grey, girlfriends or people will be like, oh, I couldn't do that, but it looks good on you. And it's like, oh,
That's
sometimes
an
I wonder,
interesting
like, it's
conversation.
interesting that we say that, right? And
Yeah.
I think we do that to each other a bit, right? Where it's like, oh, that's fine for you, but I could never. So it has been a really interesting experiment, or experience, maybe is a better word, of sitting with the discomfort of going, this isn't always an easy choice, or a choice that makes me feel comfortable, but it's still the choice that I want to make. So anyway, throw that one out there.
And whatever, you know, the other thing is to throw out there, this is not a judgment. So whatever choice you make is the right choice for you in that moment. Like, absolutely, this is not a judgment episode. But I want to have these conversations because, yet again, I feel they're conversations we don't have enough. We're not vulnerable enough about how we feel when we look at these physical changes that we see in midlife that impact how we feel about our bodies and our body image. And, yeah, going grey is a big one. Like you, I've decided that, I haven't coloured my hair since I think I was in my 20s, and I'm now 57. So, yeah.
So you just aren't grey?
No, darling, that I'm not, no.
Wow, your hair's
I went grey in areas that you don't see publicly first. That's when I found my first grey. And it was on my 40th birthday. I'll never forget it, where I was away the very first time with my husband. We hadn't done it since having the kids. And I looked in the mirror and I went, oh, that's where I've gone grey first. And it was like this lonely grey pube. And it's like, geez, well, there we go. That's midlife right there.
Here comes midlife. Right on time.
And then it started falling out. But that's a whole other conversation. So, but no, that's part of it too. You know, you get hair in places that you haven't had it before, and then lose it in other places. Yeah, that's right. A regular snipping that I've got through this
drives
mole.
me bonkers.
Yeah, and the hair's now grey coming out of the mole. So, yeah, where my body's choosing to go grey, I find fascinating. That's another interesting conversation. But, yeah, I know that I've seen comments, because I've talked about this a bit in my community. You know, this aging face is the other one that I've written about often, and it seems to be one that brings up a few little prickly thoughts and comments. And to your point about the conversation you had with a friend who said, oh, you know, go you, but I could never do that. I've seen comments where people go, I'm not ready for that yet. You know, I'm not ready for that yet. And I wonder what that is saying. And again, not judging, just curious. What is that saying? Is it saying I'm not ready to face being old? Because it's only old people that have grey hair. And that's a sign that I'm old. And old in a good way, or no, I see that. Not that I believe that, I'm trying less and less to believe in good and bad, but it has that negative connotation to it because, hello, the beauty industry, the multi-billion trillion dollar industry tells us that we need to fight aging. So when we're fighting aging, how do we fight aging? We fight it by dyeing our hair. We fight it by using anti-wrinkle cream or having work done. And that's fine. But I guess what I'm throwing out there as part of having an open, honest conversation is, are the choices you're making based on what you value and believe, or how much of that, I wonder, is based on the expectation and the messaging that we receive from the outside world that tells us that this is what being beautiful with the right body image looks like?
And I think it can be really hard to actually separate those things out
Yeah.
because, you know, there's no denying that in our Western society, certainly youth is the thing that is celebrated. And so our definition of beauty is wrapped up in youth. Um, and so, you know, I'm a member of a couple of Facebook groups where there are I join them for like makeup recommendations, but there's always comments in there and posts around there on those pages where women will kind of like put in photos, anonymous photos, can't have your name associated with it, of like a wrinkle right around their eyes. I'm 40 and this has just popped up. What do I do?
Mm.
And it's interesting because, like, again, I really don't have a sense of like what the right thing or the wrong thing is to do there. I don't think that's
Mm.
helpful.
Mm.
I'm not, you know, I know I am choosing not to do certain things, but I don't really have an opinion about what you should do or anyone else should do. But it's interesting to me that as soon as these changes start to happen, the knee-jerk reaction seems to be, oh, I don't look young anymore. There's something wrong with me.
Mm. Mm. How do I rub that
So
out?
how do
Yeah.
I erase that part of me that
Mm.
makes me feel less than?
Mm.
I remember growing up, my mum had a hard time with getting older. And I remember always thinking to myself, but isn't it better than the alternative? Like, I just remember as a kid and as a teenager thinking, but why would you not want to get older? Because if you don't get older, you're dead. So I remember having that very kind of naive way of looking at it. But I've
Mm.
tried to retain that sense when I do look in the mirror and go, holy shit, who's that woman? I kind of think, well, I'm also feel really privileged to be here. I don't
Yeah.
know, like,
Yeah.
but I think that the knee-jerk reaction, the automatic thing is to compare ourselves against what we were or what we're seeing society say is right.
Yeah. What is the definition of beauty? Being beautiful.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I must admit, being honest, the whole belly size thing is not something that I'd ever have experienced before in my life personally. Sure, after having children, notice the changes, but this change is different. This change is different. There's a lot more subcutaneous fat going on, and it is changed. And also, there's some functional differences too. Like there's a whole shopping list of things that 60 odd plus symptoms of perimenopause and the menopause transition, and our skin drying is one of them. We're losing that elasticity in our skin, and things are drying up in areas that have never dried up before. And I'm finding that functionally on the inside, I need to work harder at getting my bowels to move, for example. Like these
Mm.
changes inside, and I know that some of that is driving what happens on what I see on the outside. And we've talked about being self-compassionate many times on different episodes, and that's where I have to consciously say to myself, function first. Is you are you doing what is right for your body to feel good, to work well, to be healthy? And if that's a yes, then focus less on how that appears, because it's function
Mm.
first. And that's a message that I'm repeating to myself over and over, almost daily now, because I've gotten into the habit of looking in the mirror and going, oh, how's my, and I stand side on and I go, well, what's my belly profile today? And I've never done that before in my life. So
Mm.
for me personally, that's where I have to pull myself up and go, function first. Am I healthy? Am I working on my health? And then this is changing. This is happening for a reason. And now I'm also fortunate. I get curious and I go, well, why are these body changes happening? What is the physiological change that's happening within my body to have it look this way on the outside? And, there's
Mm.
certain things that I certainly didn't know about, but, that I've come to learn through having the conversations that we've had with our experts here on the podcast, and also doing my own research. But, the fact that we store, when we lose estrogen, as we do in the menopause transition, we no longer store it in our reproductive areas, in our reproductive system. So our body says, that's okay, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to store it in your fat cells. And that's why that's one of the reasons, part of the reasons why we build up this extra bit of fat is because your body's going, okay, we're going to put some in there for you, So, and for someone like me who's, osteopenic as well, I look at that and I go, oh, that's good. My body's doing the right thing by me. It's helping me out because it's putting a little bit of estrogen that I've no longer manufacture myself, to the greater level that I used to, and it's looking after me. So I have that conversation with myself about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece around any kind of conversation around body image is the need to have some ways to respond when we find ourselves being less than kind. I think that's a really important thing because, we can definitely just ride that sort of negativity bias wave, which will take us down paths that are pretty uncomfortable. And so I think that, to hear that that's a choice, it's kind of like a conscious, like, hang on a second, how do I look at this in a different way? Or how do I be compassionate towards this when it feels uncomfortable? It makes me think of when we sort of started season 1, way back at the beginning. We kept using this word, or certainly when you and I were talking about the podcast, we did this sort of idea that midlife is this sort of slow decline into decrepitude, and that's sort of this image that exists out in the world, right, of decline and breaking down and irrelevance and all these awful images of just kind of going from, fully relevant to being kind of broken down and discarded, and it's an awful image. But it does tend to be how we think about our bodies and our appearance as we get older. It's like, well, the best is absolutely behind, and so as my body does these things, it's all part of this slippery downward slope that I have no control over. And I think I see this sometimes in the movement world too, where it's like, oh, things just don't move as well as they used to. And, I think that can be a body image sort of issue too, when we maybe used to be more physical than we are, or we start to be like, oh, I can't do that thing. Or, that can play a huge role in our body image too. And so I wonder, like, is some of this around, like you say, function first, and kind of making the choice of like, okay, well, how do I prioritize the functioning of my body so that I have that sense of capacity and resilience and contribution and vitality. I don't
Just
know,
to
that's where
do
my
shit.
brain's going. Just
Yeah,
to be able to
yeah.
do shit that matters
Just
to
to be able
you.
to do
Yeah.
shit that matters to me. Yeah, ultimately, that's right. Yeah. And that's my number one now is how does this come back to my health, more than anything else.
What would you miss out on if you let the feelings around, what the profile of your stomach was in the mirror on Tuesday morning? If that was in charge, what would you miss out on? I wonder.
Yeah, or what frame of mind would that put me in to then show up on that day? It's that huge mindset piece as well. Yeah, as well as what would I choose not to do because I didn't like the way I looked because of my bigger tummy or my grey hair or my extra wrinkles or my spots or whatever it is that you choose to focus on that you see. Yeah, and I'm not saying, like my tummy's bigger, but I've also had a bone scan done recently and a bone ultrasound, and I said to them, look, while you're at it, can you tell me what my visceral fat's doing? Because I know that's not good to have visceral fat around my organs. So is what's going on around my tummy, getting bigger, is that having a negative impact on my health? And that's a question that I want answered in fact, not a guess, So, yeah. So it's a fact finding mission as well. You know, give me the reasons why, and can I do
Yeah.
something to help myself to put me in a better position health wise around that.
Mm. And I think it's important to point out too, that we can say those things, right? Like, what do we miss out on? What do we like? It sort of is a bit of a pep talk in some ways, and it can still be really freaking hard
Oh yeah,
to do, right? Like, it's not. I want to make sure that that's not coming across as flippant or short-sighted, because our experiences are our experiences, and they're so valid. And this stuff can be paralyzing at times, at certain times in our lives. And so, I definitely don't want that to come across as being a flippant, like, just remember what you're, what you're missing out on. Of course not. But I do think it can be helpful to think like, we've looped our conversation around to values a lot of times this season, and
mm,
what matters to me, and you know is it more important to shield this thing in my body that feels vulnerable, or is it more important for me to show up to this thing that really matters? And I think that can be an interesting way to at least start a conversation with yourself
mm,
around some of this body image stuff. I mean, there's a reason why there are so many books and so many podcasts and so many things that center on body image, because it's something that every woman contends with throughout a lifetime. None of us are coming to midlife having never had a body image issue.
no,
Like, really, that can't be
no,
possible. So, we're familiar with it, but I think those challenges perhaps change and shift and morph, and then they're kind of combined with other things that are going on in our lives that are new and different. And so yeah, we have to be so kind to ourselves in that process, I think.
yeah, we absolutely do. And I do feel that in midlife, the changes are different than what we've seen before in our bodies.
Mm.
And to have the conversations openly like this with our friends as well, and not in a ha ha he he cover it up, this is what I've experienced firsthand as well, is the downplaying of how we feel about how that change is impacting us. We
Yeah.
tend to, shove it down to the side or not deal with a joke or a ha ha or some kind of, the language that we use as well.
Dismissive, yeah. And
Yeah, dismissive. That's a great word for it. Yeah. And that
I
makes me
think that's
really
partly
sad.
because yes. I think it's partly because we don't wanna see our friends suffer, right? And so I
Mm,
think that sometimes we're quick to do that for each other, and we mean it. There's that, like, "Oh, it doesn't matter because we mean it."
mm,
But we also recognize, I think, that when it's us that's suffering, those comments are often unhelpful, right? Or
yeah.
they often don't land with the gravity
Mm,
that they're
yeah.
intended. It's like,
Yeah.
that's fine, but I can't see past it. And I've had
Mm,
conversations with girlfriends who have had um, injectables and various things. And we've had conversations around the can't think of the right word, the conflict that they experience
yeah.
around that sort of, wanting to look a different way, but also having this thought of, I also don't want to subscribe to the narrative that says that's what I have to look like. And so trying to pick apart, what
Mm,
is my desire? What is my insecurities? What is my choice? Because that's part of it, right? We
yep.
all get to have those choices. And so I think, it can be really hard to have those conversations, even with people that we trust, because there is so much gray area around the choices that we make and how we feel about things. It really can be very hard to sort of put yourself in somebody else's shoes, because we only see the beauty, right? I mean, I know we judge each other too. That it's naive of me to say that, suggest that we don't. But really, like, I love seeing a life in somebody's face. And I think most people do, but they are like, that's fine for you, but it's not okay for me. And so I think it can be hard to have those conversations because we struggle to hear those platitudes, because it's like, well, but I don't feel that way on the inside. So thanks, but no thanks,
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah. To understand why and to appreciate why without judgment. Yeah. And always with love and compassion. I know they're very tricky conversations to have. And, there's a time and place for all that too. But it would be wonderful if we could open them up and go there a bit more, in appreciating that it would be in a safe place, with love. Yeah. I
And
think
I
that
think
would
in a
be helpful.
recognition that somebody else's choice isn't a judgment
No.
on you. I think
Yeah.
that's a really important thing. I have to remember that often. When I hear other women talking about getting their hair dyed, I have to remind myself they're not judging my decision to go grey because they chose to get their hair dyed. Because that's actually where my brain goes, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, if
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
not willing to
Yeah.
go grey, they must be judging my decision to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
And I
that's
mean,
right.
to be fair, maybe they are. But at the
Mm.
end of the day, their
Does
decision
that
is
matter?
not a reflection on my decision and
Mhm.
vice versa.
Mhm.
So I think if there's one thing that I really try hard to do in this space is to recognize that, sometimes I will have that knee-jerk reaction of like, I think somebody's judging me based on their
Mm.
actions.
Mm.
And then I'm also very aware of the fact that, well, perhaps then other people are having the same feeling, right? That I'm judging them
Mm.
because of my actions. And so I think when we are having those conversations around body image and perhaps the things that we do in response to things that we don't like the look of, is to really practice that skill, I think, of genuine non-judgment as best we can. We're humans, we do judge. Because I don't think any of us intend to have it, have that impact on another
Hurtful.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not especially not our friends. No, that's exactly right.
No.
It
Yeah.
also makes me think too, Erica, that if we find it difficult to have the conversations, that maybe we start with the conversations we have with ourselves insofar as being conscious of the words that we use when we are talking about our bodies and the changes that we see in our bodies. I'm wondering if that would be a helpful thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of words that we use that we don't even realize we're using when we're talking about our bodies that are probably not constructive, it's or positive or helpful or whatever, the words in that family are. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. And I think over time they're damaging, if they're in our vernacular the entire time in our vocab and over we use the same words when we're talking about a particular body part. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think we see this a lot, and I think we do. We use words like hate and disgusting, and we do it without a mindful awareness of the impact of that. And I think one thing I would offer up in this space that I think can be helpful is that sometimes when it comes to body image, what if the goal isn't necessarily positivity
Mm,
for an area that you're currently talking about through those words of hatred and disgust? What if the goal was to become more neutral about that, right? Or um, more compassionate towards it. So sometimes I think, it's a bit of a stretch to be like, my stomach's disgusting, to, oh, I love this part of me. It's changing and
mm,
it's whatever.
mm,
Like that
mm,
can feel a little bit too
mm.
much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it might be that we can switch from that hatred and disgust language to, oh, I feel really negative towards this part of my body and that's hard. And, I also recognize that this is a part of my midlife
Change.
transition and
Mm,
change,
mm,
and this is hard to get used to.
mm,
But I'm really committed to not speaking to myself like that. So even though
mm,
it feels disgusting and even though I don't like it very much,
mm.
I'm really not going to use that language with myself.
Yeah, you're not going to make
And
it worse by using negative words around it. Mm.
yeah, and it doesn't mean you have to swap them out for,
No.
sunshine and unicorn words, but just maybe don't be so hard on yourself and yeah, open yourself up to that compassion and something that feels more neutral.
Yeah. And then the choices that you do make, don't be hard on yourself for that. And like the self-judgment about the choices that you make with any changes that you do to, feel better about how you look. I don't know. The words and the actions.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little bit like what we were just talking about around, I'm kind of having an example pop into my mind of going and getting your hair dyed and then feeling like, oh, I feel so bad that I'm so, wrapped up in this and I can't just let myself go grey or whatever. When you notice yourself having those conversations, whether it's about your hair or anything else, you just kind of like give yourself permission to pause and be like, huh, that's really interesting that I'm feeling a sense of guilt or frustration or vanity or whatever. What do I really, value? Like what could that sort of moment of kind of give me pause to consider? Because maybe I'm actually doing something that I really want to do, and yet I feel pressure from outside of myself to not care that much, but I do care. In which case you can kind of get curious and be like, okay, well, I'm going to set aside that guilt and be like, this makes me feel
This
fantastic.
feels good. Yeah, this
Yeah.
feels good. Yeah.
Or you come back and you go, actually, I feel like I'm being kind of pushed into this by a social standard that doesn't align with my values. Okay, maybe it's time for me to consider a different way. So I think it's, can we give ourselves enough space to get that curious mind thinking about what's really happening here? Because there's so much noise. There's the internal noise of our own judgments, there's the external noises of the world's judgments, there's the internalized noise of our friends and parents and all the things that we've heard and been told about ourselves over a lifetime. So it's no small thing, it's not a small ask to start to weed through that and figure out what actually matters to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think though what happens in midlife amidst all this enormous change is that with that we often start to question. I truly believe it's just something that happens in this time of life. I think the questioning does come up. And I guess what I'm asking of our listeners is if that's coming up for you, don't push it aside. Go with it, and have the conversation with yourself at maybe a slightly deeper level, but not to ignore it, not to push it aside if you are starting to question.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think that's it. I'm just looking at my notes if we want to cover off anything else, but I think I think we've covered it all. The words we use, no judgment, notice the changes, a positive function first, potentially, anything else, Erica?
Yeah. No, I think the last thing I would add is just like play with these ideas, I it's sort of a funny sort of area to talk about play, but I think, if we can just be like, well, what would it be like if I just tried, shifting my language? What would it be like if I tried, doing that? You don't have to stick with it if it doesn't work. But I do like this idea of experimenting a little bit rather than just, falling back into the habits that we've created, because it's very quick. I think we very quickly create these habits as our bodies and our faces and things change. I feel like I'm at the sort of start of that. There's been days recently where I've looked and I thought, gosh, I've aged a lot just in the last few months. And that's been an interesting sort of feeling. And so, I say this as a 41-year-old woman who's yet to go through a lot of these additional things. But, I think it's a continuation of a body image situation, challenge that we've all faced in various ways to varying degrees our whole lives, which is, an unfortunate truth.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully we can help our listeners bust a few, be aware of some of these expectations and filters, I guess, that we've been asked to view life through as it relates to how we look. And just, be happy with the questioning and to have the conversations and be mindful of the words that we use and always with compassion. Yeah.
Always.
Always. Well, we've got a little notebook, haven't we, Erica, that
We sure do.
we've put together because we thought, we're covering some big topics here and some of these episodes are lengthy. But maybe it might be helpful if you want to make a few notes. So we've put together a very simple little notebook that you can download, and there's a link to that in the show notes below. And also, that'll take you to our new Substack.
It will.
I don't know if you've explored Substack, girls, but look it up, Substack, all one word, .com. There's a whole world of wisdom on Substack, and we've now joined that world of wisdom. And that's where you can, if you subscribe there, they will send you the notebook. Yeah, for you to make some notes in.
And share it with someone. I think we put that in our outro, but look, there's no denying that starting a podcast and getting it into New Year's, that's it relies on word of mouth. And we would be so, so grateful if you would just share this episode with a girlfriend or with a friend, with a family member that you think you could then start that conversation with, because that's the important thing, right? Is it's how do we have these conversations in spaces that feel safe, so that we're not alone in it, because that's a huge thing. We want to be in community and connection with others to have these conversations.
Yeah, our episodes are merely the spark, aren't they? That's our intention with this, is just to spark. We'd love the flame to be ignited with those conversations. Yeah, 100%,
Exactly.
Erica. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay, until next time, our next juicy episode. I can't remember the order, but I know there's another one coming.
Something great.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.